The autumn morning at Clarence's house began like any other, with Camilla, the queen consort, reviewing her daily schedule over breakfast. The golden light streaming through the tall windows cast a warm glow across the dining room, but there was an unusual tension in the air that she couldn't quite place. Her personal secretary, Margaret, had been acting strangely all week, avoiding eye contact and seeming nervous whenever they spoke. As Camilla sipped her Earl Grey tea, Margaret entered the room carrying a sealed envelope marked Private and Confidential. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she placed it beside the china teacup, her face pale and drawn. "Your Majesty, this arrived by special courier this morning," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The sender insisted it was of utmost importance and that you should read it immediately in private." Camilla studied her secretary's troubled expression with growing concern. In all their years together, she had never seen Margaret so visibly shaken. The envelope itself was unremarkable, cream-colored paper with no return address, but something about it made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "Thank you, Margaret. That will be all for now," Camilla said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her thoughts. After Margaret left, closing the door softly behind her, Camilla stared at the envelope for several long minutes. The silence in the room seemed to amplify her heartbeat as she carefully opened the seal. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead from a private genetics laboratory in Switzerland, along with several pages of detailed scientific documentation. Her eyes scanned the letter quickly at first, then more slowly as the words began to sink in. The laboratory claimed to have conducted DNA analysis on samples that had somehow been obtained and tested. The results, according to the documents, revealed information that could fundamentally change everything she thought she knew about her family lineage. The letter explained that the samples had been submitted anonymously through a third party, with instructions to compare them against historical genetic markers from the Spencer family line. The results showed connections that shouldn't exist, bloodlines that had been hidden for decades, and relationships that challenged the very foundation of her understanding of her own identity. Camilla's hands began to shake as she read further. The documentation suggested that her biological father might not be the man who had raised her, Major Bruce Shand. Instead, the genetic evidence pointed to a connection with someone from a completely different social circle, someone whose identity would send shockwaves through the British establishment if it were ever revealed. The implications were staggering. If these results were accurate, it would mean that her entire life had been built on a lie, that her place in society and her relationship with the royal family had foundations she had never imagined. The carefully constructed narrative of her background, her family's military heritage, and her path to meeting Charles would all need to be re-examined. She thought about her mother, Rosalind, who had passed away years earlier. Had she known the truth? Had she carried this secret to her grave, protecting her daughter from a revelation that could destroy everything? The questions multiplied in her mind, each one more troubling than the last. The laboratory's letter included contact information and an invitation to verify the results through additional testing. They claimed to have more evidence, more documentation, that could either confirm or refute their initial findings. The choice, they said, was entirely hers, but they felt obligated to inform her of their discovery. Camilla stood and walked to the window, looking out at the carefully manicured gardens where she had spent countless peaceful hours. Everything looked the same, but somehow the world felt completely different. The weight of the secret knowledge pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She thought about Charles, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware of the bombshell that had just exploded in their quiet morning routine. How could she tell him? How could she explain that everything they thought they knew about her background might be wrong? The timing couldn't be worse, with the coronation still fresh in everyone's minds and the monarchy working hard to establish stability and continuity. The phone on her desk rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was her private line, the number known only to family and closest friends. She hesitated before answering, wondering if somehow word of this discovery had already begun to spread. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Your Majesty, this is Dr. Heinrich Müller from the Geneva Genetics Institute," came a voice with a slight German accent. "I trust you received our correspondence this morning?" Camilla felt her heart race. "Yes, I'm still processing the information. How did you obtain these samples?" This seems highly irregular. I understand your concern, Your Majesty. I can only say that they came to us through legitimate channels, with proper chain of custody documentation. The person who submitted them claimed to be acting in your best interests, believing you had a right to know the truth about your heritage. And you're certain about these results? Camilla asked, her voice barely steady. As certain as modern science allows us to be. However, we would welcome the opportunity to conduct additional testing to verify our findings. We understand the sensitive nature of this situation and have taken extraordinary measures to ensure confidentiality. Camilla closed her eyes, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was facing. I need time to think about this. I need to understand what this means before taking any further steps. Of course, Your Majesty, but I should mention that we may not be the only laboratory that has access to this information. The samples were apparently collected some time ago, and we cannot guarantee that other parties haven't conducted similar analyses. The implication was clear. This secret might not remain secret for much longer. Someone, somewhere, might already be preparing to use this information in ways that could be devastating to her and to the royal family. After ending the call, Camilla sank into her chair, staring at the documents spread across her desk. The elegant breakfast setting seemed to mock her now, a symbol of the privileged life that might have been built on foundations of sand. She picked up the genetic report again, studying the scientific terminology and percentage matches that seemed to rewrite her entire existence. The evidence was presented with clinical precision, cold facts that paid no attention to the emotional earthquake they represented. The morning sun had climbed higher, and she could hear the household beginning to stir upstairs. Soon Charles would be down for breakfast, expecting their usual conversation about the day's activities and responsibilities. How could she sit across from him and pretend that nothing had changed when everything had changed? The sound of Charles's footsteps on the stairs sent Camilla into a panic. She quickly gathered the genetic documents and shoved them into her desk drawer, her heart pounding as she tried to compose herself. When he entered the dining room, his warm smile and cheerful "Good morning, darling" felt like a knife through her chest. "You look pale, my dear." "Are you feeling all right?" Charles asked, settling into his chair and reaching for the morning papers. Camilla forced a smile, pouring him tea with hands that she hoped weren't visibly shaking. "Just a bit tired, I suppose. Didn't sleep as well as usual." Charles studied her face with the concerned attention of a devoted husband. After decades together, he could read her moods better than anyone, and she knew he sensed something was wrong. The weight of the secret felt unbearable, but she couldn't bring herself to shatter his peaceful morning with such devastating news. "Perhaps you should see the doctor," he suggested gently. "You've been working so hard lately with all the charitable engagements." She nodded non-committally, unable to trust her voice. How could she explain that no doctor could cure what was wrong with her now? The diagnosis was already complete, written in the cold language of genetic science, and the prognosis was uncertain at best. After Charles left for his morning appointments, Camilla retreated to her private study and locked the door. She pulled out the documents again, reading them with the desperate hope that she had somehow misunderstood their contents. But the scientific language was clear, the percentages unmistakable, and the implications remained as shocking as they had been an hour earlier. Her phone rang again, and this time the caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Your Majesty, this is Victoria Hartwell from the Daily Telegraph," came a crisp voice. "I'm calling to give you an opportunity to comment on a story we're preparing to run." Camilla's blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, what story?" "We've received information about genetic testing that was allegedly conducted on samples related to the royal family. We're told the results contain some rather surprising revelations about family lineage. Would you care to comment?" The room seemed to spin around Camilla as she realized her worst fears were coming true. Someone had leaked the information, and now the press was already circling like vultures. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she managed to say. "Our source claims to have documentation from a Swiss laboratory. They say the results could be quite embarrassing for certain members of the royal family." "Are you saying you have no knowledge of any such testing?" Camilla ended the call without another word, her hands trembling as she set down the phone. The nightmare was already beginning, and she had no idea how to stop it. Within hours, possibly minutes, this story could be spreading across every newspaper, television station, and social media platform in the world. She thought about calling Charles, but what could she say? How could she explain over the phone that their entire relationship might be built on lies, that her very identity was now in question? The conversation required time, privacy, and preparation that she simply didn't have. Instead, she called her private attorney, James Whitmore, a man who had handled delicate matters for the family for over 2 decades. His secretary put her through immediately, recognizing the urgency in her voice. "James, I need to see you immediately. It's extremely urgent and highly confidential." "Of course, Your Majesty. I can be there within the hour." "No, not here. Can we meet at your office?" "And James?" "This goes beyond anything we've dealt with before." An hour later, Camilla sat across from Whitmore in his elegant London office, the genetic documents spread across his mahogany desk. The lawyer's usually composed expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the paperwork. "This is quite extraordinary," he said finally, removing his glasses and rubbing his temples. "If these results are accurate and if they become public knowledge—" "They already are becoming public knowledge," Camilla interrupted. "I received a call from a Telegraph reporter this morning. Someone has leaked this information." Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly racing through the legal and public relations implications. "We need to act quickly. First, we need to verify the authenticity of these documents. Second, we need to prepare for damage control. And third, we need to inform His Majesty immediately." "I can't tell Charles about this yet," Camilla said desperately. "Not until we know more. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. With respect, Your Majesty, keeping this from the king could make the situation far worse. If this story breaks and he's blindsided by it, the damage to the monarchy could be irreparable." Camilla knew he was right, but the thought of seeing the look on Charles's face when she told him the truth was almost unbearable. Their love story had been complicated enough, with years of separation, public scandal, and hard-won acceptance. Now, just when they had finally found peace and stability, this revelation threatened to destroy everything. "There's something else," Whitmore continued, studying the documents more carefully. "These genetic markers, if I'm reading this correctly, they suggest a connection to the Spencer family line. Diana's family." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. The irony was almost too cruel to comprehend. For years, she had lived in the shadow of Charles's first wife, constantly compared to the beloved Princess of Wales. Now, the genetic evidence suggested a connection that would make their relationship even more complicated and controversial. "That's impossible," she whispered. "My family has no connection to the Spencers. I'm afraid the science suggests otherwise. This could explain why someone was motivated to conduct this testing in the first place. If there were rumors, whispers about family connections." Camilla's mind raced back through decades of memories, searching for clues she might have missed. Had there been conversations she hadn't understood, looks exchanged between adults when she was young? Her mother had always been somewhat secretive about certain aspects of their family history, but Camilla had attributed that to typical British reserve. "We need to contact this laboratory immediately," Whitmore said. "We need to understand how they obtained these samples and who else might have access to this information." As if summoned by their conversation, Camilla's phone rang again. This time it was Margaret, her voice tight with panic. "Your Majesty, there are reporters gathering outside Clarence House. They're asking about genetic testing and family secrets. The palace press office is receiving calls, but no one knows what to tell them." Camilla closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in around her. "Tell them we have no comment at this time. And Margaret, clear my schedule for the rest of the day." After ending the call, she looked at Whitmore with desperate eyes. "How long do we have before this becomes a full-blown crisis?" "Based on my experience with the press, I'd say hours at most. Once one outlet runs with the story, the others will follow immediately." "We need to get ahead of this," Camilla nodded, steeling herself for what was to come. She had survived scandals before, weathered public criticism and private heartbreak, but this felt different, more fundamental, more devastating than anything she had faced. "James, I need you to arrange a private meeting with Dr. Muller at the genetics laboratory. I need to understand exactly what they know and how they came to know it. And then," she paused, her voice breaking slightly, "then I need to tell my husband that everything we thought we knew about my family might be a lie." The attorney nodded grimly, already reaching for his phone to begin making arrangements. As Camilla watched him work, she wondered if their marriage, their family, and the monarchy itself would survive what was coming. The private jet touched down at Geneva's airport just as the afternoon sun was beginning to set behind the Swiss mountains. Camilla had never made such an impulsive international trip, but the urgency of the situation left her no choice. James Whitmore sat across from her, reviewing legal documents and preparing for what could be the most important meeting of their professional relationship. Dr. Heinrich Müller met them at the Genesis Genetics Institute, a gleaming modern building nestled in the hills overlooking Lake Geneva. The German scientist was younger than Camilla had expected, perhaps in his early 50s, with kind eyes that seemed to understand the gravity of the situation without needing explanation. "Your Majesty, thank you for coming so quickly," Dr. Müller said as he led them to a private conference room. "I want you to know that my team and I have maintained the strictest confidentiality throughout this process." "Then how did the press find out?" Camilla asked directly, her exhaustion making her less diplomatic than usual. Dr. Müller's expression grew troubled. "That is something we are investigating ourselves. Only 3 people in our laboratory had access to these results, and I trust them implicitly. However, I suspect the leak may have come from whoever originally submitted the samples." He placed a thick folder on the conference table, opening it to reveal detailed genetic charts, family trees, and scientific analyses that went far beyond what Camilla had seen in the original documents. "Before we proceed, I want to assure you that everything I'm about to share has been verified multiple times. We understand the implications of our findings, and we would never present them without absolute certainty." Camilla braced herself as Dr. Müller began explaining the complex genetic evidence. The samples, he revealed, had been submitted 6 months earlier by someone claiming to represent a historical research foundation. They had included hair samples allegedly collected from various sources, including items that had belonged to her late mother and other family members. "The initial analysis was routine," Dr. Müller continued. "We were asked to establish family lineage for genealogical purposes. However, when we compared the results against our database of historical genetic markers, we discovered something unexpected." He pulled out a family tree that had been painstakingly reconstructed from the genetic evidence. Camilla's name appeared at the bottom, connected by lines that traced back through generations she had never known existed. "Your biological father was not Major Bruce Shand," Dr. Müller said gently. "The genetic evidence points to someone else entirely, someone whose identity creates a connection to one of Britain's most prominent aristocratic families." Camilla stared at the chart, trying to process what she was seeing. According to the genetic analysis, her biological father had been a member of the Spencer family, making her a distant cousin to Diana, Princess of Wales. The irony was almost too much to bear. "This is impossible," she whispered. "My mother never mentioned any connection to the Spencers. There were never any family gatherings, no acknowledgement of any relationship." "That's not entirely surprising," Dr. Müller replied carefully. "Our research suggests this was the result of an affair that was kept secret. Your mother was very young at the time, and the social implications would have been devastating for both families." James Whitmore leaned forward, studying the documentation. "Doctor, can you tell us more about who submitted these samples? We need to understand their motivation for conducting this analysis." Dr. Müller hesitated before answering. "The samples came through an intermediary, a private investigator based in London. He claimed to be working for a client who preferred to remain anonymous but wanted to verify certain family connections for historical purposes." "A private investigator?" Camilla's heart sank. "That sounds like someone was deliberately trying to uncover damaging information." "That was our concern as well," Dr. Müller admitted, "which is why we felt obligated to contact you directly, rather than simply sending our results to the person who commissioned the work." The doctor pulled out additional documents, showing how the genetic evidence had been cross-referenced with historical records, birth certificates, and other documentation. The picture that emerged was of a brief affair between Camilla's mother and a young Spencer heir during the late 1940s, a relationship that had resulted in a pregnancy that was kept secret from both families. "Your mother married Major Shand shortly after your birth," Dr. Müller explained. "He appears to have known the truth but chose to raise you as his own daughter. The secret was maintained for over 70 years. Camilla felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she thought about the man who had raised her, loved her, and never once made her feel like anything other than his cherished daughter. Bruce Shand had died in 2006, taking this secret to his grave and protecting her from a truth that would have complicated her life immeasurably. There's more, Dr. Muller continued reluctantly. The genetic analysis also reveals connections to other prominent families. The Spencer lineage traces back to several royal bloodlines, which means my connection to the royal family predates my marriage to Charles. Camilla finished, understanding the full implications. I'm already related to them through blood. The revelation sent a chill through the room. If this information became public, it would raise questions about whether Camilla had known about these connections when she first met Charles decades earlier. It would fuel conspiracy theories about predetermined relationships and hidden agendas within the royal family. Doctor, we need to understand who else has access to this information, Whitmore said urgently. Can you guarantee that these results won't be shared with anyone else? I can guarantee our laboratory's discretion, Dr. Muller replied. However, as I mentioned, someone else commissioned this work. They may have conducted similar analyses at other facilities, or they may have additional evidence that we're not aware of. Camilla's phone buzzed with an urgent message from her security detail. The press presence outside Clarence House had grown throughout the day, and several major news outlets were reportedly preparing to run stories about royal family secrets and genetic revelations. We need to get back to London immediately, she said, standing up from the table. How long will it take you to prepare a complete report of your findings? I can have everything ready within 2 hours, Dr. Muller assured her. But Your Majesty, I should warn you that this information, if it becomes public, will likely prompt other family members to seek genetic testing as well. Once these questions are raised, they tend to spread quickly. The thought of other royal family members discovering their own genetic surprises was almost too much for Camilla to contemplate. The monarchy had survived many scandals over the years, but systematic questions about bloodlines and legitimacy could shake its foundations in ways that previous controversies had not. As they prepared to leave the laboratory, Dr. Mueller handed Camilla a sealed envelope containing the complete genetic analysis. Your Majesty, whatever you decide to do with this information, I hope you know that our intention was never to cause harm. Sometimes the truth is complicated, but it's still the truth. During the flight back to London, Camilla stared out at the darkening sky and tried to prepare herself for the conversation she would have to have with Charles. The man she loved, the man she had finally married after decades of separation and scandal, would have to learn that their relationship was even more complicated than either of them had imagined. We need to consider our options carefully, Whitmore said, breaking the silence. We could challenge the authenticity of these results, question the methodology, or even claim that the samples were contaminated or mislabeled. Camilla shook her head. No more lies, James. There have been enough lies already. If this is the truth, then we need to face it honestly. The truth could destroy the monarchy, Whitmore warned, and lies could destroy it just as easily. Camilla replied. Charles deserves to know what we've learned. After that, we'll face whatever comes together. As London came into view below them, Camilla clutched the genetic report and prepared for the most difficult conversation of her life. The king's private study at Clarence House had never felt so imposing to Camilla as it did that evening when she finally found the courage to tell Charles everything. He sat behind his desk reading through official papers, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. The familiar sight of him in his reading glasses, surrounded by the books and photographs that told the story of their life together, made what she had to do even more painful. Charles, she said softly, closing the study door behind her. We need to talk. It's extremely important. He looked up immediately, recognizing the gravity in her voice. Setting aside his papers, he gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. You've seemed troubled all day, darling. What's wrong? Camilla placed the sealed envelope containing the genetic reports on the desk between them, her hands trembling slightly. This morning I received some information that changes everything we thought we knew about my family background. Charles studied her face with growing concern, then looked down at the envelope. What kind of information? Genetic test results, she said quietly. Someone had DNA samples analyzed, and the results show that my father, the man who raised me, wasn't my biological father. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Charles slowly removed his reading glasses, setting them aside as he processed what she had just told him. I don't understand. How is that possible? Who would have conducted such tests? Camilla explained everything she had learned over the past 24 hours, from the mysterious delivery of the initial documents to her emergency trip to Geneva. With each revelation, she watched Charles's expression change from confusion to shock, to something approaching disbelief. "You're telling me that you're biologically related to Diana's family?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "According to the genetic evidence, yes. My biological father was apparently a Spencer, which makes Diana and me distant cousins." The words felt surreal even as she spoke them. Charles stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden where they had shared so many peaceful moments. "The press already knows about this, don't they? That's why there were reporters outside this morning. Some of them know, or at least suspect. We don't know how much information has been leaked or to whom." Camilla joined him at the window, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Charles, I need you to know that I had no idea about any of this. I'm as shocked as you are." He turned to face her, and she saw a mix of emotions in his eyes that broke her heart. There was hurt, confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. "How do we know this information is accurate?" "Genetic tests can be manipulated, can't they? I spent the afternoon with the laboratory director in Geneva. The evidence is overwhelming. They've verified it multiple times using different methods." She paused, struggling to find the right words. "I know how this looks, Charles. I know how complicated this makes everything." "Complicated?" Charles's voice rose slightly before he caught himself, remembering where they were. "Camilla, if this becomes public knowledge, it will raise questions about everything. Our relationship, our marriage, the legitimacy of the entire royal line. People will wonder if you knew about these connections when we first met decades ago. I swear to you I didn't know. My mother never said anything, never even hinted at any connection to the Spencer family. The man I called father loved me and raised me as his own, and I never had any reason to question my parentage." Charles began pacing the length of the study, his mind clearly racing through the implications. "Think about what this means, Camilla. You and Diana were related and neither of you knew it. The press will have a field day with that information. They'll create conspiracy theories, suggest that our relationship was somehow predetermined or manipulated." "I know," Camilla said softly. "I've thought about nothing else since I learned the truth. And there's more, isn't there?" Charles asked, reading her expression. "What else haven't you told me?" Camilla took a deep breath, preparing to share the most devastating part of the revelation. "The genetic analysis shows royal bloodlines in my ancestry that predate my marriage to you. According to the documentation, I'm already connected to the royal family through several different lineages." Charles stopped pacing and stared at her in stunned silence. The implications of what she had just said would take time to fully process, but the immediate realization was clear. Their marriage wasn't just a union between a royal and a commoner, but rather a reunion of bloodlines that had been separated for generations. "My God," he whispered, "the constitutional implications alone, I know. If I have legitimate claims to royal heritage through blood rather than marriage, it complicates the entire succession framework. It raises questions about primogeniture, about legitimacy, about the very foundations of the monarchy." Charles sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "Who else knows about this? Besides the laboratory and your attorney?" "As far as I know, just us and whoever originally commissioned the testing. But Charles, the press is already asking questions. We may have hours, not days, before this becomes public knowledge. We need to involve the palace immediately," Charles said, reaching for his secure phone. "The Prime Minister needs to be briefed, and we need to prepare for a crisis that could fundamentally alter the monarchy." "Wait," Camilla said, placing her hand over his before he could dial. "Before we bring in others, I need to know where we stand. I need to know if this changes anything between us." Charles looked into her eyes, and for a moment she saw the young man she had fallen in love with all those decades ago, before duty and circumstance had separated them for so many years. "Camilla, my feelings for you have never been based on your bloodline or your background. I fell in love with you for who you are, not for your genetic heritage." "But this complicates everything," she said, tears beginning to form. "Our love story was already controversial enough. Now people will say it was some kind of predetermined arrangement, that we were brought together by forces we didn't understand. Perhaps we were," Charles said thoughtfully. "Perhaps there are connections in this world that go deeper than we realize. But that doesn't make our love any less real or any less meaningful." The phone on Charles's desk rang, interrupting their moment of connection. It was his private secretary, calling with urgent news that several major newspapers were preparing to run front-page stories about royal family genetic secrets and that Buckingham Palace was being bombarded with requests for comment. "Sir, we need guidance on how to respond," the secretary said. "The palace press office doesn't know what information can be confirmed or denied." Charles looked at Camilla, who nodded her agreement. They had run out of time for private processing of this crisis. "Schedule an emergency meeting for first thing tomorrow morning," Charles instructed. "I want the private secretary, the communications team, and constitutional experts all present. And contact the Prime Minister's office. This is a matter of national importance." After ending the call, Charles and Camilla sat in silence for several minutes, both trying to absorb the magnitude of what they were facing. The comfortable world they had built together, the stability they had finally achieved after years of public scrutiny, was about to be shattered once again. "What do we tell William and Harry?" Camilla asked eventually. "They have a right to know before this becomes public." "Tomorrow," Charles said firmly. "We'll tell them everything tomorrow, after we've had a chance to speak with the constitutional experts and understand our options." As they prepared to leave the study, Charles took Camilla's hand in his. "Whatever happens, whatever the press says, or what constitutional crises this creates, we face it together. We've survived scandals before and we'll survive this one too." Camilla squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his resolve, but as they walked toward the stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that this crisis would be unlike anything they had faced before, and that their love would be tested in ways they had never imagined. The emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace began at dawn, with constitutional experts, legal advisors, and senior palace officials gathering in the Queen's former private dining room. The atmosphere was tense as Charles and Camilla presented the genetic evidence to a room full of people whose job it was to protect the monarchy from exactly this type of crisis. Sir Edmund Hartwell, the longest-serving constitutional expert in the royal household, studied the documents with the intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. His decades of experience had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing quite like this. "Your Majesties, I must say that in 40 years of service to the Crown, I have never encountered a situation with such far-reaching implications." The communications director, Sarah Matthews, was already fielding calls from news outlets around the world. Major newspapers in Britain, America, and Europe were all preparing stories about royal genetic secrets, and social media was beginning to buzz with speculation and rumors. "We have perhaps 6 hours before the first stories go live," Sarah reported grimly. "The Telegraph claims to have exclusive documentation, but other outlets are working on similar pieces. We need to decide on our response strategy immediately." Prime Minister Elizabeth Sterling had arrived earlier than expected, understanding that this crisis could affect not just the royal family, but the constitutional foundations of the United Kingdom itself. She sat at the head of the table, reviewing the genetic reports with the gravity of someone who understood their political implications. "The question before us," the Prime Minister said finally, "is not whether this information is accurate, but how its revelation will affect the stability of the monarchy and the government. If the Queen Consort has legitimate royal bloodlines that predate her marriage, it raises questions about succession laws, constitutional precedent, and the very nature of royal legitimacy." Charles felt the weight of his crown more heavily than ever as he listened to the experts debate the future of his family and his kingdom. "What are our options?" he asked directly. Sir Edmund cleared his throat before answering. "Constitutionally, we have several paths forward. We could challenge the authenticity of the genetic evidence, though given its apparent thoroughness, that would be difficult to sustain. We could acknowledge the findings but emphasize that they don't change current succession laws or constitutional arrangements. Or, Camilla prompted when he hesitated, or we could use this revelation as an opportunity to modernize and strengthen the monarchy by demonstrating that royal bloodlines are more complex and interconnected than previously understood. It could actually reinforce the legitimacy of the institution by showing deeper historical roots." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the radical notion of turning this crisis into an opportunity. Sarah Matthews was the first to speak. "That's an incredibly risky strategy. We would essentially be rewriting the narrative of the modern monarchy based on genetic evidence that many people won't understand or accept. William, arrived at the palace just as the meeting was reaching its most intense phase. Charles had called his son the night before, asking him to come immediately but providing no details about why his presence was needed. The Prince of Wales entered the dining room with the confident bearing of someone prepared for royal duties, but his expression changed rapidly as he absorbed the serious faces around the table. "Father, what's going on?" William asked, taking a seat beside Charles. "Your message said this was urgent." Charles looked at his son, feeling the weight of continuing a conversation that would affect generations of their family. "William, yesterday we learned something about Camilla's family background that changes our understanding of royal lineage and creates significant constitutional questions." As Charles explained, the genetic revelations, William's expression shifted from confusion to amazement to concern. The implications were immediately clear to him as someone who had spent his entire life preparing to inherit the throne. "So you're saying that Camilla is already related to our family through multiple bloodlines?" William asked, trying to process the information. "And that she's connected to the Spencer family?" "That's correct," Camilla said quietly. "I had no knowledge of these connections until yesterday. I'm as surprised by this information as everyone else." William leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly racing through the implications. "The press will have a field day with this. They'll connect it to everything from Mother's death to conspiracy theories about predetermined relationships." "That's our concern as well," Sarah Matthews agreed. "We need to control the narrative before it controls us." The Prime Minister interjected with a perspective that focused on the broader governmental implications. "Your Majesties, we also need to consider how this affects our relationships with other Commonwealth nations. Some of them are already questioning the relevance of the monarchy in the modern era. This revelation could either strengthen their connection to the crown by demonstrating deeper historical legitimacy, or it could provide ammunition for Republican movements." Dr. Margaret Thornton, the palace's chief legal advisor, had been quietly reviewing constitutional documents throughout the meeting. "There's another issue we need to address," she said finally. "If the Queen Consort has legitimate royal bloodlines, there could be legal challenges to current succession laws. Other family members with similar connections might emerge to claim positions in the line of succession. The thought of unknown relatives appearing with genetic evidence of royal connections sent a chill through the room. The monarchy had spent centuries carefully controlling and documenting the succession, and the idea of that system being challenged by DNA evidence was almost too complex to contemplate. Charles's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his security detail. Harry was approaching the palace gates, apparently having seen news reports and wanting to understand what was happening. The situation was becoming more complicated by the hour, as family members learned about the crisis through various channels. "We need to make a decision," Charles said firmly. "The longer we delay, the more control we lose over this narrative." Sir Edmund presented 3 specific options that the constitutional experts had developed. The first was a complete denial strategy, challenging the authenticity of the genetic evidence and refusing to acknowledge its implications. The second was a limited acknowledgement that focused on the scientific findings, while emphasizing that they didn't change current constitutional arrangements. The third was a comprehensive embrace of the revelations as evidence of the monarchy's deep historical roots and complex bloodlines. "Each strategy has significant risks," Sir Edmund warned. "A denial could backfire if additional evidence emerges. A limited acknowledgement might seem like we're hiding something, and a comprehensive embrace could open doors to challenges we're not prepared to handle." Camilla had remained quiet through much of the technical constitutional discussion, but now she spoke with a clarity that surprised everyone in the room. "I think we need to choose honesty over political calculation. This information is true whether we acknowledge it or not. If we start this crisis with deception, we'll never recover the trust we lose." William nodded in agreement with his stepmother. "Camilla's right. The monarchy has survived by adapting to changing circumstances. Maybe this is another moment when we need to evolve, rather than just survive." The Prime Minister looked around the table, recognizing that a decision was forming despite the complexity of the situation. "If we're going to acknowledge these findings, we need a comprehensive strategy that addresses every possible consequence. We'll need statements prepared for Parliament, briefings for Commonwealth leaders, and a communication plan that reaches every corner of the British Isles. Sarah Matthews was already taking notes for the massive coordination effort that would be required. We'll need to involve historians, geneticists, and constitutional scholars. The public will want explanations that go far beyond simple press releases. As the meeting continued into the afternoon, Charles found himself thinking about his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, and how she would have handled such a crisis. The monarchy had faced many challenges during her reign, but nothing quite like this mixture of personal revelation and constitutional complexity. "There's one more thing we need to consider," Charles said as the discussion began to wind down. "How do we protect Camilla from the personal attacks that will inevitably come? The press will scrutinize every aspect of her life, looking for evidence that she somehow orchestrated these revelations for personal gain." The room fell silent as everyone recognized the human cost of the constitutional crisis they were managing. Behind all the legal analysis and political strategy was a woman whose entire identity had been called into question, and who would bear the brunt of public scrutiny in the coming weeks and months. 3 months after the revelation that shook the foundations of the British monarchy, Camilla stood in the same study where she had first shared the devastating news with Charles. The autumn light filtering through the windows seemed gentler now, perhaps because the worst of the storm had passed, or perhaps because she had learned to find peace within the chaos that had become their new reality. The initial media frenzy had been every bit as intense as they had feared. For weeks, every newspaper in the world had carried stories about royal bloodlines, genetic conspiracies, and the secret Spencer connection. Social media had exploded with theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd, and the palace communications team had worked around the clock to manage the narrative. But something unexpected had happened in the midst of the crisis. The British public, rather than rejecting the revelations, had embraced them with a fascination that bordered on celebration. The genetic evidence that connected Camilla to multiple royal bloodlines was seen not as a threat to the monarchy's legitimacy, but as proof of its deep historical roots and complex heritage. Dr. Sarah Richardson, the royal historian who had been brought in to research the genetic findings, had uncovered a rich tapestry of connections that painted the monarchy as far more interconnected than anyone had previously realized. The Spencer connection was just one thread in a complex web of relationships that stretched back centuries, involving noble families, royal houses, and bloodlines that had been lost to official records but preserved in DNA. "The public response has been extraordinary," Charles said as he reviewed the latest polling data. "Approval ratings for the monarchy are actually higher than they were before the revelation. People seem to find the genetic complexity fascinating rather than threatening." Camilla smiled, remembering the early days of the crisis when they had feared that the monarchy itself might not survive the revelations. "I think people appreciate honesty even when it's complicated. We chose to trust them with the truth, and they responded with understanding." The constitutional experts had ultimately determined that Camilla's genetic heritage, while historically significant, didn't change current succession laws or royal protocols. The monarchy operated on principles of legitimate inheritance and parliamentary recognition, not on genetic purity or bloodline supremacy. If anything, the revelations had strengthened the institution by demonstrating its adaptability and transparency. William had emerged as an unexpected champion of the new narrative, using his platform to discuss the importance of understanding complex family histories and the role of genetic science in modern genealogy. His thoughtful speeches about identity, heritage, and the evolution of royal traditions had resonated particularly well with younger generations. Harry, who had initially been skeptical of the revelations, had eventually come to see them as validation of his long-held belief that the royal family was more connected to ordinary people than traditional narratives suggested. The genetic evidence that showed common ancestry between royal and non-royal bloodlines had become part of his advocacy for a more inclusive and accessible monarchy. The Spencer family had handled the news with characteristic dignity, issuing a statement that welcomed the newly discovered connection while emphasizing that it didn't change their respect for Diana's memory or their relationship with the royal family. Earl Spencer had privately reached out to Camilla, offering family documents and photographs that helped fill in gaps in her understanding of her newly discovered heritage. Perhaps most surprisingly, the revelation had opened doors to healing relationships that had been strained for years. Camilla's biological connection to Diana's family had somehow made it easier for some of Diana's supporters to accept her place in the royal family. The genetic evidence provided a context that transformed their relationship from a rivalry into a reunion of bloodlines that had been separated by secrecy and circumstance. "I've been thinking about my mother lately," Camilla said, gazing out at the garden where she had spent so many hours processing the revelations. "I understand now why she never spoke about certain aspects of our family history. She was protecting me from complications she couldn't have imagined would become public knowledge decades later." Charles joined her at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She raised you with love and gave you the foundation you needed to handle whatever life brought you. I think she would be proud of how you faced this challenge." The private investigator who had originally commissioned the genetic testing had never been identified. Despite extensive efforts by palace security and legal teams, the mystery of who had wanted this information revealed and why remained unsolved. Some suspected political motivations, others believed it was connected to historical research or genealogical curiosity. In the end, the identity of the person responsible seemed less important than how the royal family had chosen to respond to the revelation. Dr. Muller from the Geneva laboratory had become an unexpected ally, providing additional research and analysis that helped the palace develop a comprehensive understanding of the genetic findings. His scientific expertise had been invaluable in explaining the complex hereditary patterns to both the media and the public, lending credibility to the palace's transparent approach to the crisis. The constitutional review that had been triggered by the revelations had resulted in several modernizing reforms to royal protocols and succession laws. While the fundamental structure of the monarchy remained unchanged, the process had prompted valuable discussions about transparency, legitimacy, and the role of genetic science in understanding historical relationships. "I want to visit the Spencer family estate next month," Camilla said suddenly. "I want to see where my biological father grew up, understand the family history that was hidden from me for so long." Charles nodded approvingly. "I think that's a wonderful idea. It's important for you to connect with that part of your heritage, especially now that it's no longer a secret." The guest room at Clarence House had been converted into a research center where Camilla worked with genealogists and historians to piece together the full story of her complex ancestry. The genetic evidence had opened doors to understanding family connections that went back centuries, revealing a rich tapestry of relationships that included noble families, royal houses, and common ancestry that connected her to thousands of people across Britain and Europe. Letters had poured in from around the world, from people who claimed genetic connections to the royal family, and from others who simply wanted to express their fascination with the revelations. The palace staff had been overwhelmed by the volume of correspondence, much of it positive and supportive, thanking the royal family for their honesty and transparency. "The strangest part," Camilla reflected, "is how this crisis that I thought would destroy everything actually brought us closer together. The process of facing the truth, as complicated as it was, strengthened our relationship and our commitment to each other." Charles smiled, remembering the long nights they had spent discussing the implications of the genetic findings and planning their response. Maybe that's what love really means, facing the truth together, whatever that truth might be, and choosing to build something stronger from whatever you discover. As evening approached, they prepared for a quiet dinner with William and his family, a routine that had become even more precious since the genetic revelations had reminded them how complex and interconnected their relationships really were. The crisis had passed, but the deeper understanding of family, heritage, and love that had emerged from it would shape their lives for years to come. Camilla picked up a letter from the day's correspondence, one that had particularly touched her. It was from a young woman who had recently discovered through genetic testing that her own family history was different from what she had always believed. The woman thanked Camilla for showing that such revelations, while initially shocking, could ultimately lead to a richer understanding of identity and belonging. "Perhaps that's the real lesson from all of this," Camilla said, showing Charles the letter. "Sometimes the truth is more beautiful and complex than the stories we tell ourselves. Sometimes discovering who we really are opens doors to love and connection we never expected." As they walked toward the dining room where their family waited, Camilla felt grateful for the genetic revelation that had initially seemed so threatening. It had given her a deeper understanding of her own identity, strengthened her relationships with Charles and his sons, and somehow made her feel more connected to the long history of the monarchy she had married into. The future remained uncertain, as it always did for public figures navigating complex personal and constitutional responsibilities. But they would face whatever came next with the honesty, transparency, and commitment to truth that had carried them through their greatest crisis and made their love stronger than ever.